Hello, everyone. Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. As ever, we've got Natasha, our pro CPO, Conrad, the innovator, and you got myself, Zach, your expert on procurement. We join you with almost 70 years of practical procurement experience. That's a lot of years. Here at Proc-N-Roll, we discuss the latest and greatest trends and topics in procurement. So let's just jump right into today's discussion. I think last episode, we talked about the importance of feedback, both giving and receiving feedback, and importantly, taking action as well off the back of that. So naturally, our conversation has progressed onto now stakeholder management. So today's topic is all about stakeholder management. Stakeholders matter, right? Do you have the right stakeholder management talent within your team and the right capabilities? How do you get started? How do you improve on stakeholder management? So happy to kick it off. So if the goal is to enable business success, Natasha, the right stakeholders are key. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Probably one of the most visible and measurable procurement metrics is delivered value and spend under management, which means in practical words is how much spend can procurement influence by bringing subject matter expertise, by bringing best practices in industry, leading trends into the organization, by introducing the right service providers, by introducing the right service level. How much of it can procurement bring into the organization and share with the stakeholders, enough to the degree to excite stakeholders to think about some alternative solutions to their areas of goods or services that they delivered to the company. And in order to excite stakeholders, like if you excite stakeholders, that means that you as procurement professional will be allowed to influence that spend associated with this particular category. And if you influence the spend, more often than not, you will generate some sort of value to the company. It can be in the form of savings, it can be in the form of transparency, it can be in the form of increased speed to market, it can be in the form of reducing the risk, choosing the new provider, the better provider, and so forth. So the connection between the knowledge that procurement brings to influence the stakeholder to get access to the spend, to deliver value through savings or any other attributes, that absolutely, yes, the relationships between procurement and stakeholders are critical.
Right off the bat, we have almost prerequisite, right? Is if you want to get stakeholders excited and working with you, you need to know your stuff. You need to know your category, your market. You need to be able to bring real insight, and you need to operate at their level and communicate at their level, right? So is that where we start with stakeholder management? Don't know, Conrad, if you've got a view.
I was just thinking about, I don't know what business book I got this out of, but it was kind of talking about leadership, and some leaders like have a look in the mirror style, like every time, like when you look in the mirror, look at yourself, and when you look out the window and look at others. And it's, and this isn't that exact metaphor, but I was thinking so many times I see procurement people that are kind of obsessed with their own priorities, their own goals, almost like a mirror version of like, this is what matters to me. This is what we're doing. And they're really more looking at themselves and looking at their own goals and objectives than they are looking beyond kind of the mirror through the window to the business. What do they need to get done? So if the goal, if it really is enable business success, unless you get past the walls of procurement into the business, what does that even mean? How do you begin to deliver to this objective of enable the business success without being engaged with the business? I don't know how you do that. So to me, you've got to get out of your office, out of the chair, whatever, like, metaphorically, and get into their business. And that's when you kind of take procurement from being a processing function to being a partnering and a relationship function. And to me, that really makes all the difference. And you're kind of saying, yeah, so okay, now you stand up, you get out of the office, you go to their space, virtually or however you're doing it. How are they going to respect and embrace you as a team member and involve you in their stuff? Yeah, sure, you need credibility. Yeah. But there's categories and there's stakeholders where it's going to be impossible that you're going to be at their level, really deep technical engineering. Or I see a lot of organizations that struggle to include procurement in HR benefit selection, right? They have these consultants that do the HR benefit stuff. Like, we don't really need procurement here because we're using, who are they, Natasha? They're always doing
it's usually Marsh or Aon.
Yeah, so it's like procurement's just kind of boxed out of that because it's just so technical and detailed. It's like, we got it. But even in those cases, I think that there are unique and general things that we can bring in from a procurement perspective to add.
But I can tell you, like, this particular example, because you're right on the money, right? Benefits are very often difficult category for procurement to penetrate into. We did it in one company. And we have one category lead who was determined to learn it. And we had solid relationships with that stakeholder, with HR, on other projects that we've done for them, right? We delivered very good results in something a little bit less technical, like recruiting, for example, training. And I think there was something else, or recruiting, training and talent development, right? And then we started having conversation. Then we said, all we want to do is to review one of those providers' contract, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, there is subject matter expertise that a third party brings, but every officer of the company would agree with you if you would say that nobody would negotiate as well for us as ourselves. That a third party has deeper subject matter expertise, deeper industry connections. They may have even greater buying power if they're buying on behalf of us. But from negotiation perspective, from structuring the contract, from thinking about where the company is going, what's the growth path, and like, nobody will do it as good as you own, right? And we were able to review that contract from the third party, identify some holes that existed there by the virtue that the contract was 12 years old. And we built a solid proposal to the stakeholders that, like, give us a chance, give us a try. We did not replace a third party at the first round. We split the responsibilities of who does what. And it was very successful partnership.
So break that down. You guys got into this category from a stakeholder management and a category management perspective that many people don't. I think you just said by small success, kind of go in and participate, get success together, build the relationship and the partnership, and then, not pushing policy or making demands, but kind of bringing value and offering suggestions and kind of opening the door together.
Yeah. I was at that time senior director at that company. And I said, as a senior director who manages a spend of $3-4 billion at that time, it is my responsibility to look at the contract where we spend over hundreds of millions of dollars a year. That's the argument that is hard to argue against, that as a procurement professional and a responsible person for a certain spend, I do have a right to look at the agreement. If I look at the agreement that is 12 years old, the business is very dynamic environment. And you certainly can assure that in 12 years, the business has changed, and approach to the spend category should have changed too. So start slow, win big, always focus on the relationships, and then look at the angle. Like, if mentally a category lead can prepare themselves not to be territorial, not to be possessive about it. I have to do it, but instead finding a way, how can I bring value? Like, what's my angle? And you can find a way to work with others.
But then that brings on a great question, Natasha. To make this practical, right? What are the easiest levers to bring value? Let's say you're trying to approach a stakeholder or a team in the business that procurement doesn't have a relationship with. You're trying to expand procurement's influence. You don't understand, you don't manage that spend very well. You don't understand technically what they do very well, but you want to build relationships and you want to be involved and participate. Is it in your example, is it the contract commercial knowledge, the negotiation expertise? I'm just wondering what people can draw on, right? When they don't have a blank slate, for example, with a stakeholder.
Can I jump in there? I mean, it seems to me like it's always different. So that real answer there has got to be, it depends, I think.
It's situational.
Yeah. Do you, as you were talking through that, I'm thinking, am I here to help you or are you here to help me? Again, it's this kind of window mirror thing. Like, hey, I have this thing I need to do in procurement. I need you to do this thing this way for me so we look good or so we follow policy or whatever, where I come in and I'm like, we're actually here to help you. What are your priorities? What are your goals? What does success look like? Where are there gaps in your team or your process that from a procurement perspective, we can come in and help? And that can lead to some really weird kind of conversations that don't feel like procurement. When we were at Adobe, the team that managed all the laptop, inventory and refresh for the company, when we had that conversation with them, they were struggling to really move forward in how this process was working because they didn't have a project manager to implement some of this inventory management stuff. And on the indirect side, this is not what you would expect an indirect sort of stakeholder management, category management person to do, is get involved in a project implementation for IT, but they couldn't make progress on it because they didn't have the person. We had a person that was really good at that. And he actually started working and acting as if he was an IT project manager for this particular priority. And that isn't typical procurement. Like if you read the book, it wouldn't say that's what you do, but it's like, how can I help you? And then all of a sudden it starts opening up this relationship in ways that it wasn't before.
I think that's a great insight, Conrad. I've also had that experience quite often, where you find yourself doing a procurement job, but you're doing different things in a role. I've always wondered, though, if people have issues with that. Other functions aren't expected to put on a project manager hat every 6th week, but here we are in procurement. We're encouraging people to try different things, take on different roles in the interest of building that stakeholder relationship. Is that the right thing to do, right way to go about it? Is it, to be expected of a modern day procurement professional?
I know this isn't where you were going with it, but in some ways it's like, I'm doing this in order to manipulate you to do what I want you to do, or I'm doing this because your success needs this to be done and I'm doing it to help you. A byproduct is we actually have a great relationship. We move the business forward and together we bring value to the business, which almost inevitably leads to, hey, I need you to do these other value procurement things as well. Because we have access to the historical spend. We have access to the suppliers. We have the skills and talent to negotiate, right? I've never seen a case where the relationship improves, the collaboration improves, and the value decreases. Like it always goes up when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would add to that the phrase but that's not what I do. That's not even beneficial for any side to look at it from that perspective, right? Because let's take the same project management, right? Like if procurement professional is telling you a leader that, hey, they started using me as a project manager. That's not my job. Is it or isn't it, right? And I think that, well, make it yours. Make it fun, right? Like you already deep in, finish the project, help them with successful implementation. You already know all the players. It's probably not your full-time job. So it's not taking all of your time. Build additional skills, get to know more people across the company, thicken your resume with more stories, because next time you start interviewing for another company, you will have more stories to share. Whenever you're going through the interview, nobody will remember your facts and numbers and digits and all of that. They will remember the stories that you share. And the more categories you plug yourself into, and the more projects and the more hats you wear during your career, the more fun and interesting and vibrant and diversified your stories will be. So at the end of the day, who wins the most? Is it the stakeholder? Is it the project? No, it's a procurement professional who became project manager, who just solidified relationships with stakeholders and built better resume for themselves.
I think it's one of the beautiful parts of procurement, right? You get this, that every day, every month, every year can be different, depending on kind of what category you're working in with, what team you're working with, what the business needs. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, let's say you start off to want to approach a stakeholder, but you find the stakeholder not responsive, or, doesn't really want procurement's help, is fine. She's fine. Thank you very much. What would you do to sort of get them on side, right? So you can break through and build that relationship. Bear in mind, this is a challenging stakeholder who doesn't really want to deal with procurement.
Natasha, I want you to give an example on this if you can think about it as well, because I know you've got a couple of good ones. But I want to. When I grew up in procurement, I was at Intel, and I think I graduated my Intel days thinking my goal is to touch every dollar that flows through the company. Like, I need to touch every stakeholder. I need to touch every dollar. It all needs to work. And about that time, Google's becoming something, and I'm starting to talk to some of my peers over at Google, and they're explaining to me this massive growth they're having, and how their approach to procurement isn't, we got to touch every dollar, because it is impossible to touch every dollar. They can't hire procurement people fast enough to be involved in enough deals and enough stakeholders, enough business to touch every dollar. So it became like and this is outside in visibility. I never worked at Google. So those of you that have or whatever, I'd love your feedback on this. But my observation was the business was responsible for their contracts. They had legal people in the business. The business was responsible for their suppliers and their supplier relationships. Their business was responsible for the pricing and the negotiations. Purchasing, procurement was there to support and help them. And there wasn't enough procurement people to go around. So in that model, if you've got a stakeholder that's being, obstinate, doesn't want to participate, I don't have time in that model to fight with you. If you want to do it yourself, and maybe you can even claim that you're better than me, that's totally fine. There's 5 other stakeholders that really need my team or myself involved in their stuff. And so you kind of move along. I don't think that that's typical. I think more often than not, you have enough team and you do this stakeholder segmentation, and now you're looking at a particular stakeholder and going, this is really critical to the success of the business. They spend a ton of money. They don't want anything to do with me. Almost back to Natasha's HR example, right? That's one that's hard to break in, but it's a really big critical one to the business. How do you get past that barrier of, I don't actually want to? And I think Natasha gave a great example before of some resistance. I don't know, Natasha, if you've ever had anyone that was super resistant to procurement, or, your warm personality always won them over right away.
Yeah. No. But I want to go back to Zach's question for a second, because it's a good question. What do you do if there is resistance, right? Specifically, a couple of things that can be done. In one of the categories of spam, in my career, I've been very fortunate. I worked with amazing CMOs almost across all companies. And they had open marketing doors to procurement. There was some companies where it was harder, right? Not for me, but for my peers, right? So I often hear that marketing is one of the most difficult categories to penetrate. Marketing is an interesting spam category because it has a lot of market intel about, and it has many different kind of subcategories within the category, right? Print is marketing, promo is marketing, digital advertising is, media is, creative is, distribution is, right? So it has many different aspects. So if, for example, if this is the category that there's a resistance, and it can be translated to any spam category, to any stakeholders, then you can start putting together newsletter. And the newsletter is one pager, almost like one slide, one scroll on the screen of the computer, maybe like a couple of scrolls on the phone. And you just proactively put all market intel that exists today. What's happening in the market? Where's the transparency? What's the acquisition between different agencies? What's happening in different geographies? You can start taking different aspect that is relevant to your marketing category, and without them asking you, just demonstrate to them that you are staying on the top of market, that you are analytical about the category, that you have access to the newest information that exists there, that you actually can tell them what the price should be without RFPing everything. Because first thing that stakeholders have in mind as soon as they hear that procurement is at their door, oh my God, they're going to make me RFP everything. It's going to take forever, right? Demonstrate that you don't need to RFP everything because you know who the top players are. And you don't have to make comparison. See, like ABC is the top player in this particular side of the industry, but you using XYZ. Don't do that, right? Like, let them see that you care, that you have thinking about it, and so forth. And another aspect, like, that's one of the ways to kind of like warm the hearts of those who are currently kind of like more icy.
My sticky note for that is bring value, right? Bring value to the stakeholder.
You have a lot of suppliers providing services to you. Do you know how many, right? And the answer is usually, we'll probably have the right number, right? And then you just show them pie chart that shows that they have 4,000 and only 10 of them generate 80% of work on 80% of their spend. And you say, like, do you really need another 3,990? Maybe you do. In some geographies, some niche players, some high level specialty, right? And you explain to them why it's disadvantageous for them to have that many, because it actually makes the life of their lower rank managers, like people who do the work every day, it makes it very difficult for them to know who to go with. It dilutes the power of the brand. It dilutes the power of the spend, and it creates additional risk. If you explain it nicely, people would want to do something about it.
The bring value sticky note, this is like vote number 2 for that. I think the first thing you said was bring external information and data. The second one you said was bring internal information and data and I think, as you're talking, the thing that I reflect back into my career, and it's probably because I'm a little bit of an introvert, I never felt comfortable going quite high enough in the leadership chain for the conversations. Like, do I have something meaningful to go talk to the CMO about, right? Or to the head of engineering or the head of IT? Like, that always felt intimidating to me. But when you get there in the conversation that, like you're describing, they have no idea who their suppliers are. If you're working low enough that they know who their suppliers are, you're not working high enough, because once you get to the CMO, they know the 10, but there is no way they have visibility to the 4,000. And that is shocking to them. And immediately, like, you don't even have to convince them, like you said, Natasha, when they see the data that you have about their suppliers and their spend, they're usually responding with, oh my gosh, I've been asking my team for this forever. And now you're the source of this data that helps them actually run their data again, bringing this value that they haven't had access to before.
I think that's such a great insight, Conrad. I love Natasha's idea about like a newsletter, right? I think because at the beginning, it's not just about bringing value. I think, Natasha, you're trying to make the point that you got to demonstrate credibility and market knowledge, right? And that you're out there and you understand what's going on. So it doesn't even have to be a newsletter. Even if like there's announcement of a merger or some kind of interesting news story about a particular supplier, you need to be monitoring that. And a simple email to the CMO, the CMO -1, just to say, hey, by the way, do you know that these two firms are discussing a merger? Or, it just shows that you're keeping on top of things. And then I think, Conrad, your idea around show them the 4,000 suppliers, I think that's probably where a lot of the cost reduction programs always start. It's that lack of visibility into the tail. I think the tail is a fantastic starting point for stakeholder relationship building, because if you should, like you said, they know their top 10, they're not going to let you anywhere near their top 10, right? Because they own those relationships. They think they've got the best contracts and the best deals. They're in charge of the strategy, etc. And who are you to come in and just, start advising them on strategy and how they should be managing the suppliers? But if they tell you, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'm happy for you to address this lower level supplier or subcategory, for example, then that's a great springboard, if you like, right? As you go, you demonstrate value with smaller scale suppliers, you build a little bit of trust, you do it again and again. And, before you know it, maybe it takes 6 months, maybe it takes a year, but, eventually you'll find yourself in the same rooms talking about the same things. One other strategy that I like to use as well is if I have a stakeholder who doesn't really want to deal with me, I try to deal with the people around them, right? And try to get close to the people around them. So even if I can't get the information I need straight from the source, it's dealing with everybody else. And I think once you're in that network and, it becomes easier because you understand then the organization, you understand what they need, etc. So I think these are all super, super practical and useful.
If you care about I just always think about examples like this. As a parent, it's almost impossible not to love somebody that loves your kids. Like when you see them giving love to your kids, like, oh my gosh, this is my new best friend. And like you're saying, like, pay attention to the people around them and give them value, give them support. Like the leader will see that. I think your suggestion is genius.
Yeah. Absolutely. A lot of great advice there. I think we can move on to the next segment, because we talked a little bit about, the importance of stakeholder management, how you go about doing that. But then specifically for procurement senior leaders who want to build this as a capability, right? And obviously they might be good at stakeholder management stuff, but they want this kind of in their teams. Does procurement focus enough on stakeholder management skill sets like EQ, communication, all the soft stuff, right? The networking, etc. Does procurement have scope for like a business partner type of role that you see in other functions like HR and finance, etc.? And where does, should this role be a newly created role? Is it pretty focused on relationship management, or, should you expect everybody in your team to be doing that alongside other more maybe technical type work? I'm really interested to get both of your views, how you get that team culture of stakeholder engagement, customer service, etc., and how you organize your department or your function to deliver that.
I'll start with a reminder that as much as between the three of us and hopefully the listeners, as much as we love procurement is not a centerpiece. Procurement is a support function. And the centerpiece is company's goals and objectives. And we also touched it earlier in our conversation today that procurement's goals and objectives cannot be hovering in the air, right? They have to reflect what the goals and objectives of the company, what the company is marching toward to. If this is the year of increasing the revenue, then how can we support the teams that are actually responsible for generating the revenue? If this is the year of increasing profitability, then how can we then there's more emphasis on cost reduction, while in the first instance, there's more emphasis on speed to market, right? If the company is going through acquiring other entities, then how can we allocate resources to have speedier integration and assimilation of the acquired entities into your enterprise? So it always depends on what's important to the company. And remembering that procurement is a serving function, a servicing function, it's a support function, then you kind of like as a leader, you instill this connection between you and stakeholders and the mantra is, how can we help? Right? It's if we are having conversations and using our procurement terminology, and we always kind of like double click and triple click on all procurementism, and it's a foreign conversation to our stakeholders. And if it's a foreign conversation to our stakeholders, they're not going to be interested. They're not going to pay attention. So I don't think we need to have a special relationships manager. I think that's why many successful procurement organizations, they have structure of having a category lead that is a liaison between procurement and a stakeholder, right? And that person is the one that often sits, not with procurement, but physically sits with their stakeholders. And this person is the one that understands all the budget pressures that business experience, all the leadership expectation from that business unit, and all their dreams and aspirations and bright and brilliant ideas. And then the layer of sourcing managers who actually make the vision of category leads that the category leads and stakeholders created, that they take it to the market and make it happen, right? So I think that this separation between sourcing function that does the work and works with suppliers and internal function of category leads that predominantly works with the stakeholders. Maybe that's what you mean by relationship management.
Yeah. So as a category lead is sort of, you're suggesting is the business partner for procurement, right? So it's equivalent in role maybe to a finance business partner, an HR business partner. Would you put it that way? Yeah. But then, okay, how much would you weight then on a category lead's skill set in terms of their stakeholder management abilities? Is that most of their job? Is that what they're there to do? Is, manage stakeholders, especially senior ones, understand the business strategy, contribute towards that strategy, come up with a commercial category strategy, etc. Is that how you'd frame it in terms of the skill sets?
There's so much complexity in what we're talking about, because if you look at a smaller organization with a smaller team, they're not even going to have a category manager as Natasha's describing, right? You're implementing sourcing, you're doing, you're renewing and refreshing contracts and things like that. And those people are engaged with the business, right? As much as they can, not doing the same things in the same sophisticated ways that a dedicated category manager would do. But you still have to be you're still managing relationships. You're still working with stakeholders. You're still doing those things. And then you grow to a certain point where you can begin to maybe justify having a dedicated person that's doing category management, and sourcing is executing those strategies. There's such a big continuum there. Where do you say, when I'm going to hire somebody that actually is good at relationships, they have EQ, they have these other softer skills versus hardcore data or this, or, there's just a bunch of skills you could bring to your procurement team. How and where do you make those decisions? When I was at Intel, and they were a large enough organization that they had category teams across all the categories that really didn't do just like Natasha described. And I got further into my career and I thought, I'm going to go implement this as well. It was virtually impossible. I didn't have enough team members. I couldn't make it work. So I was more in this middle space where we weren't big enough to have formal category management. But we started hiring people that were softer relationship side versus the technical procurement experience kind of folks. And it was a massive payback because what they were doing is they were, oh my gosh, we've got to go renew this contract in this category with this stakeholder. And so you actually have to parachute in and do stakeholder category management, relationship management in a hurry to try and get this thing across and get the best result that you can. And then, get back out and then parachute into the next one because it's so much more transactional than strategic category management. We hired people with no purchasing background, but a proven capability of working well with people and having relationships and being able to, in some ways speak their language. but in more ways than that, actually, you know, the kind of people you'd want to hang around with, go out to dinner with, sit and talk to. And that really, I don't know. My advice is, you don't need that person that's doing your purchase orders, but you need that person that's working. If they're talking and working with your stakeholders, even at a sourcing level, they need those skills.
Well, for our heads of procurement, I think they've heard it here now. You've tried it and it's worked, Conrad, in terms of hiring somebody without maybe a technical procurement skill set, but a strong stakeholder management skill set. You said it paid off massively, right? So I think that's great anecdote for others who maybe want to try something similar.
Sorry, I just want to go back, just to rewind a little bit and comment on something you said. And that I think is really important as the leader, that you are the Uber stakeholder management.
Sure.
Stakeholder manager. Like, you have to understand from like a matrix perspective, I am stakeholder managing at the C-suite across all these functions. I'm meeting with them regularly. My team sees me meeting with them. They hear the pass downs. And then I sort of map at my team, whatever size I am. I could have the big category structure that we were talking about, or it might just be sourcing. I am assigning people to the leaders below the C-suite at whatever level I can with whatever resources I have. Like mapping out a stakeholder map of who's doing what, and we're working at the top and the middle and lower based on the resources on the team.
Absolutely. Natasha, is that how you'd go about it? In terms of maybe getting started?
Yeah, connections, like neurons firing at different levels, but you always start. It is the responsibility of the leader of procurement organization to open the doors for their teams to be successful. And sometimes it happens that the doors get easier open at the 1 or 2 levels below the C-suite. But ideally, you want to start at the C-suite to make sure that you align, right? That both sides, procurement and the C on another side, understands the priorities in the same way, because then the procurement leader can help their team to step into supporting stakeholders. But these connections, like this neuron firing, should happen at every level. Senior director, managers, right?
Yeah. Just, I think for our audience, remember, it's all about neurons firing and making those connections. And it takes a bit of time, but you get there. Conrad, Natasha, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for listening. Hope you learned a thing or two about stakeholder management. Please stay tuned for the next episode. And thank you both.